Okay. I got to get this off the screen. It's like, you got to get all these little things off. Okay. All right. So I know people are popping in. Patty, eventually, if you can kind of, I don't need a number, but just write down the number for me once we get going a little bit, because I'm not going to look at it after I actually start.
So Ted said that the figs are doing well so far. Thank you.
Good. I was worried about some of that heat early on, which we're actually going to talk about tonight a little bit with the vegetables, that heat that we had, those 3 weeks of or 2 weeks of really hot and no rain. I didn't know if you get fruit drop. I didn't know if temperatures were really going to be a problem. Well, the fig's not so much because it likes the heat, but some of the other plants might not be so happy if their flowers dropped. So, okay. So why don't I'll get started. So I want to welcome everybody to the In the Know to Grow 2021 series. We're doing our vegetable gardening Q&A with myself. I'm Susan M. Hart-Servideo, one of the horticulturists in the Rutgers Cooperative Extension Master Gardener Coordinator. I'm just doing well today. And I wanted to also with us tonight is Patty Dixon, who is also one of the horticulturists in our office in Ocean County, and Jean Kramer from our Master Gardener. I won't say my Master Gardener of the Year, but you're pretty close. But he did our talk last year in vegetable container gardening. So we brought Jean on to help us with lots of your questions. But your videos, microphones, and the chat features have been disabled. So please, you can use a little Q&A question box. You can click on that, and then you can type in your question. If you would, please make sure that you are asking your questions to all panelists. Because if you're sending it to me, I won't be seeing it as the host. I can't see when I'm doing my PowerPoint. I can't actually look at the Q&A as we go. We did have a program scheduled for July. Unfortunately, our speaker is under the weather, so we will be doing our next talk August 17th at 7 for bulbs for spring flowers, because you want to start planting your bulbs in the fall to bring out that the tulips, daffodils, hyacinth, crocus, some of the little small muscaries, my favorite. So you want to, maybe you can join us for that. That link will be coming up soon. We don't have the flyer ready to go yet on that. And okay, so let me go through. Patty and Jean, anything to start with? Are we good?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions coming in already.
Okay.
We're gonna answer some, some it's almost better to have pictures and kind of go that way, but Sue's going to cover a lot of stuff. So if we're not answering your questions in the Q&A right away, it's probably because she's going to kind of get to those topics. That's it. I mean,
okay. And yeah,
so we did to answer everything.
Yes. So I do have this PowerPoint broken down into sections. So that after each section, there will be a Q&A section. And I will try to keep, we did expand the time today till 8:30 so that we could try to answer as many questions, because I know there will be a lot of questions because there's a group of you that are on. And we did do this PowerPoint is based on questions that we sent out a questionnaire back in, actually, I think it was in March. And you guys came back with what questions you had, and we kind of Patty grouped them together for me, and we made these sections. So hopefully we're going to hit as many of the questions that people asked, because we had 180 people send in questions. So it was quite a large group of questions that came through. So, all right, I'm actually going to start today. This is our Justice for All. Rutgers is an equal opportunity program provider and employer. So if you have any questions, you can always contact us in the office if there's something that we can help with. If you guys would like to see some other programming, or our programming needs to be changed in a way, just please let us know. Okay. So our first beginning is going to be on soil and amendments. That one in tomatoes was our largest question about, what do I do with this? How do we do this? So we're going to start with the basics, because growing your vegetables and growing your vegetables well starts with what you're growing them in. So that can be very important. So soil. You want to make sure that pH is important for growing vegetables in the ranges between 6 and 7. The optimal is 6.5. I did have a question that says, oh, my plants are at 7 and how do I get to 6.5? And for most of your vegetables, it's okay to be in that range. You don't have to be at the optimal at 6.5. If you are having a problem with certain vegetables or a consistent problem year after year, even if you're rotating your crops, then testing for the fertility and the pH may be what you need to do in that soil, whether that's ground soil, potting soil for containers, that you don't really have to test for pH. Usually that pH is in that, I think it's 6.8 to 7 range for most commercial potting soil mixes. They're relatively neutral. So you could bring it down. The reason that pH is important is because if it is too low, nutrients are not available to the plants. And that's true with any plants. But with vegetables, because they're annuals, they're trying to produce fruit, they need that fertilizer readily available. So you want to kind of keep it in that range if you can. For your ground, a couple questions came in about how often should you test it. For pH, you can test your pH every year. For your fertility part, about approximately once every 3 years. So you can do that by using a soil test. You can see in the picture here, Rutgers does have a soil testing lab. And we do have, Teresa sent out a resource sheet for tonight for all the different talks we have here. Not talks, excuse me, all our different categories. And we had a lot of Rutgers fact sheets, sites where you need to go, and some things you guys can check out there. But the Rutgers, you can Google Rutgers Soil Lab, or if Patty has a second, or Jean, maybe somebody can pop it in the Q&A under somebody's question possibly, where to get a soil test kit. Rutgers Soil Test Kit is $20. That does do the fertility and pH. Once our offices are back open, some counties were all starting to kind of come back online. Our office is still closed to the public, so we are not doing our normal pH that we would do, but hopefully we will be able to do that soon. Right now, it's not an option, but normally you can get yours soil tested through Rutgers. And we also had a couple of questions on how to, what do you do? How do you do your soil testing? And when you go on the Rutgers Soil Laboratory website, it will tell you, gives you examples of how to sample. But when you do sampling, normally you would want to do this in the beginning of the season or at the end of the season for the following year, so you can start putting any amendments that you might need. So right now, yeah, you could do a soil test right now, but it takes some time for you to adjust what you need. So it may not be helpful for you in this growing season. In the raised beds, we have a lot of questions about native soil versus soilless mixes. That's another big thing with the soil test. When you are doing a raised bed, when you are growing in your native soil, which is your ground soil, the soil that's there on your property, that if the plants are growing into that soil, or if you've added a lot of bagged soil, a lot of peat moss, a lot of compost and things like that, you may be getting into that almost that soilless mix where it's not actually having any mineral content. It's not made, the soil that you're growing in, we call it soil, but the product that you're growing in is the soilless, so it's more peat moss. That's a different test that you would have to have done for a soilless mix. So anything container pots, that's a different soil test that you would need to do. Rutgers can still do that, but it's a different setup. So when you're getting a soil test, it's usually for your native soils, your ground soils, and it could still be in a raised bed, but any soil that you are going to be digging into that's directly related to the ground that's there. That's why we have natives and soilless mix. So if you see some comments about that, that'll be coming up about what to do with that. Mushroom soils. So a lot of people, I need mushroom soil. Where can I get it? What can I do? You want to think of mushroom soil as not a growing medium to actually grow the plants strictly in that. You want to use that as a soil amendment. It's very rich, very organic, but it's also spent soil. It was used to grow mushrooms. So it really is to enhance your soil as an amendment versus just straight growing in. So you want to be careful when you're doing that. I've had a lot of people say, well, yeah, I got this mushroom soil. My plants grew beautifully, lots of leaves, but it didn't seem to have a lot of flowers, or there was more, it wasn't balanced well enough. So you might want to keep that in mind if you're having some trouble. It's a great addition for your soil to help with drainage, to also help with the organic content in your soil if you have straight native soil. Topsoil, a lot of questions come in about topsoil. There are no standards for topsoil. So a topsoil you get at one place versus a topsoil down the street from a supplier may not be the same. Go see it, go look at it, go feel it. Some places you can actually go and there should be some places do have a test done that was done from the supplier that tells you this is the content of the soil, what's in the topsoil. Topsoil, true topsoil, is scraped off, is the organic, dark, rich organic layer that's above on your native soils when they're clear cutting land. And that is what, it's great. It's very lush. It's broken down material. So your nitrogen tends to be a little bit readily available. It just is a great growing medium. So knowing what topsoil you have, you're hoping it's weed free. You don't know how long it sat where it was. So, you do need to do a little homework. Go with, if you don't know where to buy it, there's no strict list. There's no one I could say, oh yeah, you want grade A topsoil. There is no standard. So I'm sure somebody will standardize it somewhere along the line, but right now it is not. And we do have people that asked about where does the soil go? Your raised beds, you have these beds and it's like you put all the soil in and then the following year it's like really low again. Well, your soil, if you used a lot of organic matter and compost, as I'll get into a little bit, that breaks down. So it's going to break down and therefore your content level will also go down in your soils. Your native soils that are made up of the minerals, which are broken down rock, came from your base soils, that doesn't really break down any further because it's minerals. It's actual, bits and pieces of stone and sand and grit. When you have that organic matter, leaf compost, things like that, that break down each year and break down every year or more into your soils, that will give you. That's why your soil levels can go down in your beds. Same with containers. If you're using in containers, we talked, a lot of people were asking us, how do you grow vegetables in containers? Potting soil, you'd want to use a potting soil mix. Yes, it's a soilless mix. You can add some native soil if you want to dig some up from your yard and mix it. The problem is that native soil, when you put that in a pot, it can clump together like a rock. It doesn't have the correct drainage that you would need because now everything is contained in this one small space. So potting soils that have peat moss, perlite, vermiculite sometimes are mixed in there. Those are the mixes that you would want to use in your container so you have really good drainage. You want to have moisture retention, but you also need drainage because most of your vegetables will drown if you have it in a too wet of a soil. Their roots cannot grow. The reason that you would do a container and use potting soil is if you have any problems in your garden where you've had some fungal issues or things like that in past years, you may need to grow in a container to help avoid those problems. Or if you can't rotate, that's a way to do it, is to grow your vegetables in containers. So it's easier said than done sometimes, but so this picture on the bottom right here is also about a soil test. This is what you would get when you do a Rucker soil test. It'll give you the pH, which you can see this colored line here, and tells you that this is 6, this is 7, and right here is where the pH is in this particular soil report. And it will give you about the micronutrients and the macronutrients, which is your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then it'll give you your micronutrients, which are things that plants do need, but they need them in smaller quantities. And that is your boron, iron, magnesium, manganese, a couple different things like that. Okay, so before I rattle, so prepping your soil, a couple questions came in about when can you work the soil. So you can work the soil when the ground is not frozen. So early spring is as long as it has defrosted enough that you can work the soil. And you don't want to do it when it's too wet. So like today with we had a lot of rain down here in Ocean County. So you don't want to be in the garden. You don't want to work on wet soil because it compacts too much. So if you are working in your vegetable garden, the other issue can be that you can get funguses on your shoes, on your hands, you're brushing against other plants. You can pass on disease very easily too. So wet soils, no good. Let it dry out a day before you go in there if you can, as best you can. You can amend the soil. You could do that amendments in the fall and in the spring. You don't necessarily, you can do a side dressing with compost through the growing season to help with adding some organic matter into your soil as the season as the season goes. Big question. Actually, we had, I don't know, 5 or 6 people asked us about coffee grounds and using eggshells in the garden. So can you use them? Yes, you can. However, the problem is coffee grounds, not problem really, I suppose, but you want to think of it as a soil amendment. You're not actually going to grow a plant in pure coffee grounds. I'm sure somebody can, and if you've watched The Martian with Matt Damon, he wound up growing on Mars. So, but in any case, yes, you can, if you have the correct fertilizer and things like that, but you don't want to have to, you want to be able to just to grow your plant. You don't want to have to do a lot of amending if you don't need to. So coffee grounds, you can add it. It does help with microbial activity. The coffee grounds take about 3 to 6 months to break down, so a little goes a long way, but it also does help with drainage because it's pretty gritty. And you're better off actually, instead of adding it directly around plants or in the garden, is to add it to the compost pile so it can break down, and then those microbes will help the compost to heat up the compost, and then also once that compost pile is ready, you can actually use the compost then in the garden. But you definitely they did some studies, Rutgers, and I think, or no, it wasn't Rutgers, I believe it was Purdue, did some studies about no more than 20% of coffee grounds in your compost. So don't be going to Wawa or to Dunkin' Donuts and grabbing their coffee grinds, because it would just be too much. It's overwhelming in your compost. So again, add it, but add it in smaller quantities. Eggshells are a source of calcium. They're great to add to the compost pile, but in the garden, the shells take a long time to break down, up to a year. So if you put those around your plants, that calcium that's going to be released isn't going to help that tomato for a long time if you're feeling that you want to use that for your calcium for your tomatoes. So grind up really small, mortar and pestle. You can grind it up really small into almost a powder, and then you can use it that way. But definitely adding it to the compost pile is a definite go. Make sure you rinse them out because you don't want to bring any critters that want to eat the eggs. You don't want to bring any critters to your pile. Okay, and then for amending the soil, okay, so a lot of people ask us about amendments. Amendments are not fertilizers. When we're talking about specifically soil, to amend your soil, we're talking about more for drainage and to retain moisture, things that you can add to your soil to help with these problems. If you have a drainage issue where it's not draining, how can you make it better? Or if you need to retain moisture because you've got a lot of sand, what can you add to it? Some soil amendments may contain some nutrients, but it's not listed. It's not a quantifiable, so to speak, of the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK. So you're not going to see on a bag of compost what the fertilizer content is in there. So that's why we do think of it as an amendment, not a true fertilizer. So what can you amend your soil with? You can amend it with composted manure. Now manures have more nitrogen, and it is that does have some fertilizer content to it. Organic matter and/or mushroom soil, you can use a group of all these things. How much do you use? There is no set recipe. So a little bit here and there. If you're using your native soil, half of native soil, maybe a half or a quarter of compost, and maybe I don't know, a quarter of mushroom soil. So you could make your own recipe, what works for you in your garden. If you have a lot of sand like we do here in Ocean County, then you might want to put maybe a third regular topsoil with, or your native, the soil that's in the ground with compost and manure. So you can make that own recipe. There is no one only way to amend your soil, and how much do you need? So you can keep that in mind. A lot of people do ask about mulches. You can use wood mulch in the garden. The thing is with wood mulch, whether it's dyed or not dyed, wood mulch is bark, so it takes a long time for it to break down, which is good. But the breakdown process, it's it can take some of the nitrogen that the plant needs from that top layer of the soil, because it's the microbes that are breaking down the wood need that nitrogen, which will give it back eventually, but it takes time. So sometimes hardwood mulches, it also doesn't turn over very well in the garden. So you may not want to use a hardwood mulch. So if you're going to use a mulch, a lot of people do use straw or salt hay. Hay, so I just put some pictures in here. Hay is usually tends to be a little greener in color, but hay is grass grains that they've cut with the seed heads on it. That hasn't been harvested. It's more thought of as for fodder for animals than it is for the garden. So it's going to contain a lot of seed that's going to be a problem for you in the garden because it's going to germinate. Straw is after those grains have been harvested. They have most of the seed heads are off of the grass, so it's just the hollow stems. So that is why straw tends to be a lot airier, softer. Straw down in the garden is great around strawberries to help keep soil from splashing, any funguses that might be on the soil from splashing up and into the onto the fruit. You know, a big problem is botrytis with strawberries, especially with wet weather. The other one is salt hay. Salt hay is hard to find. I will grant it. I know I brought it up, but people do ask us about salt hay. There are a few, I believe, suppliers down in the Cape May area. There may be some places you can get it online. Salt hay is hay that is cut in marshes, so it doesn't have it doesn't have a lot of seed content, and it is basically it's a well, it's strictly a grass, not a grain for food, like some of the other hays and the straws. So it is something, it is native for us here in New Jersey, Maryland, along the coast, wetlands. I think they said even up in Meadowlands areas, sometimes they do have some rights to do some cutting there. So salt hay, if you can find it, is a nice alternative. All of these products, whether you do the hay straw or the salt hay, can be turned over because it breaks down fast enough to then be turned over in the garden and then to be now considered a soil amendment instead of a mulch. But with it, you can keep the help to keep the soil moist while it's still fresh before it starts breaking down. Okay, and I think I have one more slide before we get to some questions. So a couple questions came in about seed starting. Now, of course, at this time of the year, we're not really thinking about seed starting for the spring, obviously. We'd be talking about actually going forward and looking for our fall gardens. So just a quick seed packets have on the plant labels. So if you're buying transplants, they'll tell you how much spacing. A lot of questions came in about how do I space square foot gardening and different questions like that. You really need to kind of, spacing definitely depends on the plant. So there's no one set, yes, square foot gardening, you can only put so many things. Cabbage can take up to, one cabbage can be up to 3 foot in your garden. So it can take up a lot of retail space, a lot of space. But the days to harvest is also listed on there so that you can get an idea. So for the fall, you're going to do a lot of your cold crops like cauliflower. We've got lettuce. You've got, you could do beets, although we didn't seem to have a good try with the beets last year. But the cauliflower, let's just go with cauliflower on the package. It tells you that there's to start 70 days to harvest. So in October is when that's when their average possible first frost date is. So again, it does vary so much depending on where you are. I know that we have some people from Pennsylvania, Virginia, Massachusetts on here. So depending on where your first frost date is, you would want to count 70 days back, and that's when you want to start your plants. So for cauliflower, for us, we usually say about mid-October for first frost. We don't always get a hard frost at that point, but you plant it, so you would want to start them in sometime in July, towards the end of July, and then that 70 days will bring you the harvest, would harvest into October and into November, depending on our temperatures. So you can harvest that way. Or cauliflower is supposed to be, I didn't know that you weren't really supposed to grow them. They do better in the fall than they do for spring planting. So that's one thing. Varieties, when you're looking on the seed packets, especially with tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, look for disease-resistant varieties. If you've had a problem in the past in the garden and you don't have a lot of space to rotate, look for plants that are more resistant to those problems that you were having, especially the wilts, the Vercillium, Fusarium wilts. There's a couple of mosaic viruses. You want to be careful on those. So they have symbols, especially on the tomatoes. They have symbols on the labels that will let you know what they are resistant to. And again, some plants are better that way, but again, you have to do your homework, a little homework. Placement, full sun. Most of your vegetables want a minimum of 6 hours of direct sun, 6 hours or more. So your part sun vegetables, some people asked us about where can you grow? How can you grow in the shade? What can you grow? And it's usually the leafier vegetables, your lettuces, possibly spinach. But that part sun actually helps keep it cool when it gets hot. So that actually can help when the season gets going. So in the spring, if you only have full sun, you can do your leafy vegetables. But as we start getting into this, June was has been very warm for us, in end of May. If you have part sun, your leafy vegetables, you can kind of keep them cooler a little longer and they'll last longer for you and keep producing. One other question that actually came up quite a bit, or has come up in the past with Patty and I, has been, can I plant the garlic I find in the grocery store? You can plant it. However, there's no guarantee what's going to happen with it. A lot of garlic has been treated with growth regulators to keep them from sprouting. So it's kind of basically, shutting them down. So they have a hormone on them. Not always, but there are some that are done that way. So it may not germinate very well for you when you break apart those cloves. So that is something, yes, you can plant them, but you're better off finding ones that are specifically packaged for growing plants. I call it a seed starter. Okay, I'm at my first question break. That was probably a lot in a little time frame there, but what kind of questions you got for me, guys?
We had a question, I have to find it here, but it was about pH meters. I don't have any experience with like one you could buy at home. So are they reliable? Do you have any experience with them? Or is it better to just go to a lab? And she specifically was asking about raised beds, but just pH.
Yeah, so pH itself, in whether it's a raised bed or straight ground or in pots, you can, the pH meters would help, but obviously, I hate to say, because I really don't have experience. I've never used a pH meter. At least in our county, we do the soil tests, pH test for $5. So to me, it's easier because I'm not going to be doing it that often than to have a meter sitting around and making sure I have it in the right place. I didn't crush it. My kids didn't play with it and mess it up. So yes, would they work? I think it would give you a good basic idea. If you're finding that your numbers like really aren't coming, they're like in the 5s or something, and you're growing in your raised bed that you've been growing and plants are growing okay, but they're not perfect. If you're seeing that your meter reading is really off, then I would say go get a commercial test done. That's the best way to put it. I hate to tell you any better because I really honestly don't have any experience with the actual meters. I don't know, Jean, have you done anything with meters in particular?
Yeah, I do, because sometimes I use them in the house, even for around my house plants, and I find them pretty reliable. But I suppose it depends what you buy, So What I was thinking might be the best to do is if you want to try one, try it, and to test its reliability, get that same soil tested at Rutgers or somewhere and see if it matches.
Mhm, mhm.
Good
And then
idea.
sometimes, yeah, and then sometimes too, we do get people that ask us about, well, I got this soil tested somewhere else and it's not matching, and then I had it tested by Rutgers. There are different methods that are done, so you do want to watch if you're, trying to compare somebody else's test with somebody, commercially done, especially,
Yeah,
because we do it in different manners. So, but they should be pretty close. They shouldn't
right,
be totally off.
right.
Okay. A good question, though. That was a good question. All right, what else you have?
I see a question here from Juliet asking, is the expiration date on seed packages strict? And would they be okay for the following year? And how can you store seeds for the following year?
Oh, good question. Okay, so yes, the seed packets, the dates are not necessarily hard dates. You can use them if they're expired. It's just the germination rate will go down. So if you, let's say you had 100% germination in the date time frame, let's say you did it 6 months after the date has expired, you might have 85%. And if you have it a year after that, it might be 70%. So yes, you'll still get germination, but it's going to be less. The big thing is how did you store it? Did you leave it in the refrigerator? Did you leave it in the shed over the winter where it froze? Did you leave it, someplace moist? So it's all about storage. So storing them, if you ever notice that seed packets are in paper envelopes. Paper allows it to breathe. Plastic would make them get moldy, possibly if the moisture level for some reason they're not dried all the way. So saving your seeds in a paper envelope, in the basement, someplace cool, dark, usually not necessarily cold, but cool. You don't want to put them up next to the 80-degree heater in the wintertime, that kind of thing. So trying to keep it out of extremes is the best way to put it. So, but yes, you can still plant with it. Actually, I think one of my packs here is from 2015. I could still grow with it, but to be honest, I don't remember where I stored these. They've been in the house. I can't say I've stored them perfectly, but I would just plant a lot because I would not get a very good germination. Okay.
Someone asked about squash borers.
Oh, yep, we're coming to that.
Okay. You want to wait for that then till you get to the,
Yeah,
okay.
more anything, I guess, really specifically on seeds, seed starting, or even not even spring seed starting, because that's a whole nother lesson. When we did this, when we sent out the questionnaire, we knew we were going to get a lot of questions, but we just didn't expect it to be so all over the place, and it was hard to kind of rein it in for an hour and a half talk. So yeah, if you have anything else in soil.
There's one here. All right. So, sorry. Greg said that he's never tried to do fall vegetables, but once his squash is harvested, he will have some room. So should he add compost and fertilizer to the area before planting for the fall?
So, okay, a lot of it's going to depend on what you're going to plant for the fall. And fertilizer, you really do need to do that soil test to know what kind of fertilizer do you need to add. Maybe your phosphorus and your potassium and your pH is good, but your nitrogen, you usually always have to add some nitrogen because the plants do use that up the most, I should say. So adding some compost may be all you need. Again, it's not necessarily that the compost doesn't have any nutrients in it. It's just that it's not listed as that NPK. So you don't know how much nitrogen, but as that's breaking down, the microbes will add that nitrogen content, a little nitrogen content back in the soil. If you planted corn sucks up the every nutrient, almost, not quite, but a lot. So that soil really needs to come back to life. You really do need to amend that with some compost, and then actually definitely get a soil reading so that you know how much for fertility reading, excuse me, so you know what kind of fertilizer to put in there, because yeah, that's a really heavy feeder. So lettuces, spinach, your cooler crops, they're leafy. So leafy plants, nitrogen is what they would like, so that you got nice leaves, and you get a lot of leaves because that's what you're harvesting. When you're harvesting plants that get fruit or that need the flowers, like cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, those plants, phosphorus and potassium may be a little bit more of what you need. So yes, you could get a soil test done for the fall. It just really depends on how much you've worked that soil previously. And yes, you really should have a baseline, I would say, Greg, on that for your fall. There is on our fact sheet list, there is a whole, Rutgers has a great fact sheet on planning your vegetable garden. It is for spring and it does give you some fall recommendations. Also when you harvest, it's a lot of great information in there, and also spacing. So that's that was fact sheet. Oh, of course I just moved my page. That was fact sheet 129, which talks about when to start your seeds for planting. And that's a Rutgers fact sheet. So if you're looking up at a Rutgers page on the resource sheet, there is the Rutgers. If you go to Rutgers Publications, you can put in FS 129 and it'll come up with the Rutgers fact sheet saying planning a vegetable garden. And then, yeah, so we're going to get into a little bit about fertilizing then after this too. So I can get in a little bit more about that. Anything else that's kind of pressing?
The one that might be is, Debbie said, as you know, peat is not sustainable. Do you recommend using core as an alternative? Do you know of a potting soil that uses core and not peat? I am seeing that more and more for sure.
Yeah.
The soils have labels that, it's listed.
Yes. Some of the mixes now are coming in that do have a little bit of peat, but yes, peat is not, you are very right. Peat is not sustainable. Some are going to be more compost mix. The core mix, I have seen it. I can't say I've seen it in regular trade. You would probably have to check a specialty garden center that may carry some different brands. I think there's Dr. Earth. There's a couple different brands. I'm not supposed to name brands. Sorry. But the thing with the core, and that's great. It's great for aeration and things like that. It does take some time for it to break down a little bit. So it wouldn't necessarily want to have a potting soil made of only that. Of course, you want to have a mix. So a little bit of sand, a little bit of, trying to think what else they use. I know that I've seen the coconut hulls. There's the core that's basically shredded coconut fibers that's chopped up as well. So it is small. It's fine. I've
seen bags that actually say, I think they just say forest products, forest something.
Okay.
Have you seen that?
I haven't, but I don't know. Jean might have too. Where it's already, you said foraged, so it's basically
forest, like
oh, like pine needles or
yeah, like mulched. I'm thinking like mulched leaf matter is probably what it is.
Yeah, so you could definitely see it. I know that there are more I don't want to say responsible, because there's a lot of stuff that's out there now for them to keep mining the core, and I won't talk about not core, peat moss. No, but there are some places that still have a stockpile of things. So, I mean, yes, the peat moss is not sustainable on its own. So we are trying to change things over. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you, Debbie. But yeah, definitely read the package. If I can come up with some before, not before we end here, but before we send out the video link, because with this being recorded, I'll see if I can put some sources in there. If there's some place that we can find that's got a good different sustainable mixes, I should say.
I'm reading right now about wood fibers, certain sawdust, composted bark. They're all good alternatives for peat moss. So hopefully they'll become more available.
Mm-hmm. And again, most of the mixes aren't necessarily made of only that. Of course, they're always a mix of other things. So maybe they'll have a little bit of this with, more of that, and more of something that's not peat mossed. So yeah, they're coming out rock wool. I know you can grow that for plant starts. There's a lot of different things that they're coming up with. But again, sometimes with some of these newer products, they got to see how that they react with either your native soil, or also when you're adding fertilizers or they're breaking down, how fast do they break down? How often do you need to replace it? Things like that. So that was a really good question. Thank you. All right, I'm going to move on only because I know it's already a half hour in and I've only gotten 3 slides. So let's go fertilizer and watering. Again, we're talking about, I thought I had this in here. Fertilizer, what should I use? Soil test again. I can't just tell somebody, oh, just put in, 2 pounds of 5-10-5, you'll be fine. I don't know what you're starting with. We do get a lot of questions. What should I use? Really, a soil test is the best way to do it. Not everyone can test their soil for one reason or another. So, if you're going to use a fertilizer, the problem is, you can use any of the fertilizers that are out there for gardening. Try to use somewhat of a balance. This general fertilizer, like I'll talk about ratio in a second, 1-to-1, 5-10-5. You can go with that, but how much do you need? How much is a plant going to need? You don't know unless you know what you're starting with in the soil. Okay, so we can't stress soil test enough. That being said, if you haven't had any problems or you're not trying to address like, oh, my plants look a little yellow, you're not trying to address a specific deficiency, then a general fertilizer like we have here, I talk about a side dress, a general fertilizer 1-to-1 ratio, which would equal 5-10-5. If you find a fertilizer that's a 10-20-10, that's the same as this 1-to-1 ratio. A lot of soil tests, we've had a couple people with the Rucker soil tests, when they read the report, it says use a fertilizer with a 1-to-1 ratio. And basically you got to find numbers that, 5, it's 1, 10 is the 2, and 5 is a 1. So if you have that ratio. So Miracle-Gro, again, shouldn't do brands, but it doesn't matter whose fertilizer. But Miracle-Gro has a 15-30-15. That's a 1-to-1 ratio. Granular versus a granular pelletized slow release is really more preferable, in my opinion, especially down here, at least in Ocean County. We have a lot of sandy soils, so our plants can be dried out a little faster. So if you think that your plant is, let's say you didn't water it first and you want, I got to give it some fertilizer. Make sure the plants are well watered first, especially if you're using a liquid fertilizer, a fertilizer that you're mixing in water, and using. Water the foliage, the grounds. Try not to water the foliage. I know they tell you can, but really kind of keep the water off the foliage. That'll come into play later. So if you're going to use that Miracle-Gro or Peters or Jobs or whoever you want to use, water the plants first, then water them with the fertilizer. This way your fertilizers won't hit those dry or drought-stressed roots, which will then actually, the salts in that will actually cause a bigger problem. So you want to be careful about that. And then side dressing. Side dressing just basically means as the season's growing, as the plant is growing. So maybe once every week, once every 2 weeks, depending on your plant, depending on what your fertilizer needs are, you can side dress with a fertilizer, and you would put that around the roots and water it in. If you're using a granular, like a pelletized fertilizer versus the liquid that you mix in, the liquids, the powders that you mix in the water. But different vegetables can have specific requirements. So check a little bit. Spinach is a heavy nitrogen feeder, so they really have a specific requirement, but that spinach also has a specific pH requirement. So if you're having some trouble growing spinach, that might be what's going on, either fertilizer or pH issue. Organic versus synthetic. That's always a fun one. What's the most organic fertilizers? You got to look at your homework. You got to look at your labels. I can't give out brands and say, oh, go with, this brand. Organics are basically your non-synthetic fertilizers. I don't want to say they can't. I guess it's more sustainable with organic. So fish emulsions, cornmeal, blood meal, potash, they're all individual ingredients that potash is for potassium. So you have to know what these ingredients are. So when you're looking at the NPK, the numbers, blood meal is, I think, a 1200. So blood meal is only going to provide you with nitrogen. So you coming up with your own mix is okay, but you need to know what you're mixing and how much you're mixing together, so that you can figure out, okay, if I've got 12% blood meal and I'm putting a cup of that in and a cup of potash at 45, what kind of ratio are you making? So I'm not a math major, so math is not my ratios are always fun. But organic is good. Breaks down a little faster in the garden, and it's usable for the plants right away. Synthetic is also good depending on what is used. A lot of the fertilizers these days have both. Some organic, some of the nutrients are derived from organic means. Doesn't mean it's coming straight from fish heads or body parts of animals or things like that. So you want to do your homework and read it. There are a lot of brands out there. I'm trying to think of seaweeds and different things, but you need to look at what the ratio is for the fertilizer, that NPK. If it has a lot of potassium, and you don't need the potassium for that root growth or possibly for some stem growth and things like that, then you need to cut it down in half what you would need to use. So there's a lot of math involved in that. So you definitely want to follow the directions if they do give you directions. If you're not sure, don't go full strength, go half. That's one way to do it too. If you're not really, if you think it's a little too strong, dilute it with more water. Liming, a lot of times it tells you, everybody's like, I got to lime the garden. You may not have to lime your garden. Liming your garden, one, can add calcium depending on the type of lime that's used, but liming can also raise your pH. So if your pH is already at a 7, but you haven't had it tested, you don't know that, and now you're adding lime, which does add calcium that the plants can use to keep the fruit going, but then you're also raising your pH. So you really need to find that balance. And I'm not trying to make this a lot of work for you guys. Once you kind of get a feel for it, you'll see a lot of times just grow it, see what happens. Take a chance. Grow this year, see what, if you've got a great crop this year, you may without ever doing anything to it other than watering. Watering is definitely important. I would still add a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer because you really do need the annual plants, your vegetables. They have a lot of fertilizer requirements in the sense of they need that energy, those vitamins, those minerals to get up into the plant and get into the fruit. So watering, that's always a popular question. How often should I water my vegetables? Really approximately is about 1 inch of water per week. And when you're getting into that 1 inch, what does that mean? That's natural water from rain, from other sources, rain barrels, whatever, your hand watering, your sprinklers. But be consistent. Don't go 4 days without any, we haven't had any rain and then drown the garden. That's not going to work. Water in the morning before the plants get stressed so that hydration level stays the same. It's not like they're wilting and then you're watering and then they wilt and then they water. You don't want to have that back and forth. And don't water the foliage. As much as you can, water only at the ground level. And the reason being is that will help you with fungal issues and some other issues that come in when the foliage gets wet, especially with tomatoes and actually a lot of fruit, powdery mildews. That stuff is really perpetuated by high humidity. And if the plants are staying wet, the leaves, that humidity can be an issue. So watering, you're really going to have to see. I have watered in the morning and still came home from work and it still needed water. So I watered in the afternoon, but I watered the soil. I didn't water the plant. If I watered the plant at high noon, you actually can burn the leaves with the water because it magnifies on the leaves. So really try to keep that watering to the morning only. Again, if you have to give a supplemental watering afterwards, especially hanging baskets, anybody that does anything, tomatoes and hanging baskets or anything like that, you're definitely going to usually have to water twice a day, especially as the season gets going. So keep that in mind. All right. Crop rotation. I'm going to try and I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. I know, but there's just so much to talk about in here. Crop rotation. It's important. We have people that say, I can't rotate. I can't rotate. It's important. The reason being, it's important if you've had a problem. You can't grow your tomatoes. Every year it gets the leaf spots. You get anthracnose. You get a lot of fungal issues, more so than insect issues, are perpetual because it's the soil. It's in the soil. The fungal spores are there. So knowing what vegetables are in the same family. So this picture up here on the right-hand side here, cucurbits, cucumbers, gourds, squash, pumpkins, they're all in the same family. So when you're rotating your crops, don't plant anything in that family in this bed again. Go to the next bed. So there's a, on the bottom left, there's a crop rotation example. So if you're going to do year 1, tomatoes in this year, beans and carrots, the following year, year 2, you rotate. You bring the carrots to where the tomatoes were the beans, and vice. So that there's different demands on the fertilizers that the plants need, but also you're trying to prohibit fungal diseases becoming a problem in the garden. The big thing is moving a plant from 3 foot away to 3 foot is probably not far enough, or you really need to have some kind of a buffer. So if you only have a 5-foot garden and maybe a 4-foot wide, it's going to be hard for you to rotate. I'll definitely tell you that. So you may want to think about planting some plants in containers as well as the garden. And that way you can give your somewhat of a rotation, give that ground a break from these fungal spores constantly repeating themselves. So that is one way to do it. And that's what, when you have limited space, try doing a raised bed. Possibly even go as far, if anybody's there are community gardens, you can buy a plot that might be somewhere in your area that if you can't grow, you live in a restricted area where you're not allowed to grow certain things, or you can't have a garden, you don't have free reign, you may want to go to a community garden plot and grow there. Find one that's closer to home, and then that way, that's one way that you can have more space. Maybe rotate, maybe not grow in your garden that year, but grow in that garden the following years, things like that. And if container growing, big thing is clean your pots after each use. If you're growing vegetables in them consistently year after year, clean the pots, bleach and water, 10% bleach and water, scrub them out, bleach it, rinse it a couple times, and then put in new soil. I can't stress enough, as I forget what pot I used for tomatoes the one year, and I didn't have a problem the second year. The third year, if I didn't remember, then your problems start catching up. So that's important. Rotation really is important. Succession planning. There are on our fact sheet resource list, there are different things in each of these categories. There's a great fact sheet about succession planning, and talking about how to do your successions. Anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, you plant a new plant. So in this particular bottom right-hand corner here, you'll see the little baby lettuce that was started 2 weeks before that. There was this other lettuce, and then the one lettuce to the left, all the way to the right, that is ready to be picked. So you can pick, so it gives you that nice transition, so that you have something fresh every 2 weeks versus everything getting harvested at the same time in a 2-week time frame kind of thing, and then not having something. That's if you have space. Not easy to do succession planning if you don't have a lot of space. So keep that in mind. Okay. Wildlife. Oh my goodness. This was also a very popular question. How do you keep wildlife out without having fences, when you can't have fences? And lots of questions. There's no right answer. There's no one answer. Exclusion is really the best way. Doesn't necessarily mean it fits in with your lifestyle or where you live or what you're allowed to do if you're in a certain community. But exclusion, whether it's for bunnies, birds, they fly. So there's some things, deer, Chunk the groundhog here on the left-hand side. You can watch his little, he's a fun little video. You can watch him. This gentleman has him, but trying to keep him out of your garden, fence it in, gravel. There's some, yes, it's going to need some work. Deer are tough. Rabbits are tougher because they can get in smaller spaces. You can use perimeter repellents, so they will work for some time. The reason we tell you not to put your repellents on your vegetables is that, one, they're repellents, and they usually are really strong flavored, either pepper sprays or putrid egg whites and things like that. You don't want that on your fruit or if you're eating lettuce, you don't want that on your lettuce. You don't want to taste that. So you don't want to be putting it on your fruit directly. You want to put it around the perimeter of the garden to keep the animals outside the garden. So there is no great one product. You do want to rotate it, change those products every couple of weeks, because if you decide to do that way, because the critters can get used to those products. Trapping, as humane as you can trap. You need to check with your Wildlife and Game Commission department for us here in New Jersey. Animals that have a chance to carry rabies, you cannot take them out of your county, and they cannot be moved into a county park. There's a lot of restrictions with that, so you do want to be careful about that. All right, if you're trapping to release. So these were just some, I just wanted to show you some methods here. And plant extra. Sometimes if you have a fenced in area and you plant some stuff for them elsewhere, if you've got the space, sometimes they'll go to that and keep them out of your main area. Sort of like, here, have your smorgasbord over here, but leave my stuff alone. It works sometimes. Again, a group of different things here. Try a little bit of everything. That might work for you. So in this, if you get to watch Chunk the Groundhog, he's a YouTube sensation. The gentleman was trying to keep Chunk out. He did keep Chunk out by planting some plants on the outside, but now Chunk has resided under his shed. Chunk now has a girlfriend, and they have babies. So he has a little video set up, and you can watch Chunk eat, and it's cute. It's really cute. But in any case, here's a method with if you can't do a whole fence on the outside, bird netting, deer netting, things like that, and make a frame. So that you can, still get into the fruit and to get to harvest, but also keep the animals away. It works really well with blueberries and other fruited crops as well to help keep the birds off of them. This is also another way, which I thought was kind of a neat way. They made a teepee. They used what looks like beer bottles, wine bottles on the end, and then put your deer netting or your netting over that so that the ends of the stakes don't poke all the way through. It'll make a tent over your plants and keep those animals from actually getting in and pushing in and getting to those, especially squirrels. A lot of questions came in about squirrels. And then here's another way, this is just chicken wire, simple chicken wire, and some T-stakes, metal T-stakes in the ground to try to keep as many things out as possible. A lot of things do burrow, so if you do have digging animals, you're definitely going to have to sink your fencing down a bit to give it some protection that way. So there is a wildlife control fact sheet on our resource list as well. So if you want to get some more specific information about some of these methods, that would be good. And questions in particular about wildlife, crop rotation, fertilizer? Guys, I'm going to try not to. I'm so tired. I talk too much. Nope. Go ahead, God.
Here's one from Mary. Will cayenne pepper affect brown-eyed Susans?
Oh, the cayenne, like I'm assuming pepper flakes to keep animals away.
Yeah.
I don't know that answer. I honestly don't know that answer. I wouldn't think it would, but yeah, I'd have to do some research on that. I'm sorry, I can't answer that. Interesting question. Anything else in particular?
She said she used it early in the spring, keep rabbits excluded. So yeah, I've heard that cayenne pepper.
I've heard it too. I heard that it works because the rabbits have taste buds, so that's why the cayenne pepper works. But that still means they got to nibble on it, and rain will wash things away. So is it effective? How effective? Does it hurt the plants themselves? I just still don't know that. All right. I'll take another one question because I know I still have a bit to go, and don't mean to be talking so much, but this is a big subject.
Yeah, I don't think I see anything.
Okay. All right. If anything. Okay, yeah, if anything pops on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about specific vegetables now. Just some questions that came through on specific vegetables. A lot of people asked about companion planting. And I know it's too tiny to read, but this companion planting chart can be found. I left the actual, you can look up the Virginia State fact sheet, 8-17, companion planting in the gardening. You can just look up the words companion planting in the gardening in your Google search or whoever search you use, Bing. And you can do the crop, it tells you what crop and then what other plants you can grow with that crop. So you can do tomatoes and asparagus in the same area, but you don't want to do onions, garlic, or potatoes in that area. So that's a big question. We do get that. I never really think about it because I don't grow a lot of vegetables myself. I have to say, I'm definitely more of a perennial person than I am for vegetables, but I think it's really cool to be able to pick your own plants. But this list, there's a great list. Are you going to kill the plants if you do it one time? Probably not. So if you did a mistake, okay, fix it the next year when you do it. Container gardening, what kind of vegetables can you plant in containers? Try everything. Jean will tell you if you get a chance. I do have our recording of our vegetable gardening down here. I have the link that's also on your resource page. I've done potatoes, I've done peanuts, I've done watermelons, beans. I've done everything in a pot. I can't say I always had great luck. I wouldn't say I've got the most lush, greatest harvest, but you know what? It was fun. It was easy. I could move it around. It worked for me. But dwarf varieties, if you really want to know for patio situations and things like that, dwarf varieties would be better. Things that grow mature younger because you have limited space. So it is much more dependent on you for the water. Determinate tomatoes that basically do not keep growing and vining up to 7-8 feet would be better in pots because you have limited space. But tomatoes need a large pot. So do not think of planting a tomato in anything smaller than, I'd say, a minimum of a 14 to 16 inch wide pot and some depth to it. One plant in that pot. So that may not be conducive for you if you have limited patio space as well. So you want to keep that in mind. But it is going to be, when you're doing containers, your plants are going to be more dependent on you for the water and nutrients. So you will have to fertilize that a little bit more than what you would do when you're in the ground soil. And so, like I said, you can watch Jean's our program from 2020 for some other questions. Jean had some great pictures of different things he's tried in his garden from year to year. So that's something you can do. A lot of questions come in. What varieties are the best for growing in New Jersey? And you know, what works and what doesn't work. There's so many new things that keep coming out. Try things. But specifically, Rutgers has a fact sheet of varieties for New Jersey home garden vegetables for gardeners, excuse me. And that is the fact sheet FS 681. You can follow that. You can copy that link down. It is on your resource sheet. But these were some specific questions that came in from clients that wanted to know about lettuces. What can you grow? What kind of lettuces can you grow into the summer? And then, you know, so you have it more season long and not just at the spring or in the fall. So there's different types of lettuces. The butterhead, the head or betterhead lettuce. They're moderately tolerant, so you can see some of the different varieties that are listed here. Crisp head lettuce, like your icebergs, they don't really like warm temperatures, so the head lettuces, you may want to skip those. Go with a butterhead. Leaf lettuces and oak leaf lettuces, or just the leafy ones, they actually do better, and they're relatively quick to harvest. So you can usually get a harvest within, I think, a month to 48 days or something like that. So a month and a half, you can actually have a harvest. And baby lettuce versus baby spinach versus fully mature is just the same plant. It's just you're picking the leaves earlier. And while they're still younger versus fully mature. And the romaine lettuces can be a little tricky to grow in the heat, but there are some heat tolerant ones listed there. With shade cloth, careful gardening planning, and the right variety, you can enjoy crisp, fresh lettuce into the fall. I have grown mine. The problem is with lettuces and spinach and some of your cabbage, you know, some of your normal cold loving crops, they bolt. In other words, the heat makes the plant go into, I got to make seeds before I die. So it bolts, and that's why usually the heat is an issue. So if you find some lettuces that tend to tolerate the heat better, that would be what you want to go with. Because we did have some lettuce, Patty planted some lettuce in our garden at the Ag Center, and not lettuce. Well, we did lettuce, but spinach, and we did get some harvest out of it, but quite a few of them bolted before we actually got to do anything with them. So we were kind of surprised because it was May and we had bolted spinach already, but we were warmer this year, so it can make a difference. All right, let me see. Spinach, so this is what I was saying, spinach is sensitive to pH. It likes it on the higher end or more towards neutral, so 6.8 to 7, and high nitrogen. So most of your soil tests do not give you a nitrogen reading because nitrogen is used very quickly and disappears out of the soil, so to speak, fast. So I don't want to say you can't go wrong with putting nitrogen. You can overdo nitrogen. You get lots of leafy plants, but not a lot of flowers, things like that. But you definitely want to do some side dress with some nitrogen fertilizer with some nitrogen content in it as the season goes. A lot of it depends on the type of crop. Again, leafier crops are going to need a little bit more nitrogen. Corn needs, if you do corn, you did. But the spinach will bolt with the heat a lot easier than lettuce does. So keep that in mind. Question to come in about Brussels sprouts. You're going to plant those for a fall harvest. Same with the cauliflower. Versus doing that as a spring or spring planting, you're going to do these for fall planting for Brussels sprouts because they take a long time and you want that cooler weather for them to get those nice sprouts. Potatoes. I've done the potatoes in a planter. They actually do really well. It's kind of fun for the kids too. But again, when you're doing potatoes, potatoes like to be what they're called heeled in. So you can start with your container with a third of soil at the bottom, plant your plants, and then you're going to systematically add more soil to mounds, basically pretend like you're making a mound in the pot. And that you're going to cover the stem. So you leave a little bit of leaf out. Then as it grows up again, about another, I think it's 2 to 3 inches, you can put another round. And you do that, I think, up to 3 times. But that'll help produce potatoes lower in the pot or along the stem, so to speak. But it will continue to produce. So that's a good thing. And when do you harvest potatoes? You harvest them when the leaves turn yellow, which would be usually like later August-ish timeframe. Again, the reason I'm speaking about these specific vegetables, these were questions that came in from you guys, from those that were those 2,000 people that sent us questions back. So alliums and chives and garlic. Chives can be cut. You can. Somebody was asking about chive flowers. Do you cut the flowers off? Do you leave them on? You can cut the flowers off to help the energy going into making more leaves. But you can actually use the flowers for garnishes and actually in butters and cream cheeses and things like that. So that's kind of cool. The garlic, softneck garlic, when do you harvest it? Usually you're going to harvest in July when the foliage goes yellow. And then you need to dig up those, the bulbs and let them cure. They have to sit, I think, three to 4 weeks. They have to let them dry before you can actually use the cloves. Hardneck garlic. They produce those really the long scapes that do these curlicues. You can actually do these. There's a whole market for garlic scapes. That's what they're called. The flowers are called the scapes, as those long things. When they go into they're going almost into their second curlicue is when you want to pick those. And again, the hardneck garlic, you are also going to dig those up when those leaves turn yellow, which is usually, again, later. I think they're actually a little later in August, a little bit more, so more than just July. Cucumbers. Which varieties are the best? Climbing, trailing, it really depends on what works for you. Do you want to, if you have the space, you can let them trail across the ground. The harder part for you is to be picking it. You have to get between the leaves, don't step on the stems. So climbing gives you much more vertical gardening and leaves you more space. So if your space is at a premium, trellis them. The biggest problems with cucumbers, powdery mildew, cucumber beetle. I do have a section. I was hoping to be there by now. So I do have a section on the problems there. So oops, sorry, we'll go back to that. Squash, big questions coming in about flowering, but no fruit. The big thing is their male and female flowers. So here on the left-hand side is a picture of the male flower. There is no, it's just a little bump here. There's no actual fruit. On a female flower, there's actually a little baby fruit started there. So what happens is the fruit is underneath the female flower, it gets pollinated, and then that pollen goes down and actually fertilizes the seeds. And then as the fruit grows, that's what you're eating. So that's pretty cool. Big problems with squash, which we all know, squash zucchinis, squash vine borer, squash bugs, and powdery mildew. 3 big problems that happen, and I promise I will get to that. So let me just keep going on. Specific on eggplants, no fruit. The big thing is with if you're not getting fruit on your eggplant, it's possibly because of flower drop, which means the heat, it's too high. It's drought stressed. Or you may need to hand pollinate. For some reason, you're not getting pollinators. You may need to hand pollinate. And here's the flower. And actually, you would take the pollen, which is the yellow on these yellow parts, and put it on the tip of the pistil, which is the little green dot there where the arrow is. And that's you would just hand pollinate. It's actually pretty easy to do. The big problem, I think a lot of people, other than caterpillars and things, is flea beetles. Lots of little holes in the leaves. Peppers, colored peppers. So that was a kind of a question like, I have green bell peppers. I left them on the plant. Now they're red bell peppers. Well, if you let maturity, if you leave your peppers on, they will mature a different color as they get older. So kind of getting an idea of what you're looking for. Also, some of the varieties are specific colors, but yes, it's about how long you leave them on the plant to get some of those colors. The problems, sun scald is a big one. The sun gets in there, and blossom end rot, which is that calcium deficiency, which I will talk about after this one. Tomatoes, hybrids versus heirlooms. A lot of questions come in about hybrid tomatoes versus heirlooms. Your hybrid tomatoes are going to usually have your bigger fruits. They have a lot more resistance to some of these viruses and wilts and things that we were talking about, funguses that are in the soils or that can be transferred. The heirlooms may have better taste, but their plants can have a little bit more fungal issues because they have not been bred out for that. Also, people say, can you save your seeds from your tomatoes and some of your plants? For tomatoes, F1, they call them hybrids, F1 hybrids. They know that they put this parent and this parent together, and this F1 always comes true to when they put these 2 parents' seeds together, pollen together to make the seed. In your garden, you don't know what's getting how it's getting pollinated. So those seeds it's not going to come true to, yes, you can use the seeds, but you don't know what kind of tomato plant is going to result from that cross pollination, open pollination, they call that. Heirloom tomatoes, on the other hand, are more consistent, that their seeds, no matter how they're pollinated, will come closer to the parent plant than the hybrids do. So that could be some differences for you. So a lot of people, they love their heirlooms, but you might have a little bit more disease issues. Hybrids, a lot more disease resistance for some of the varieties, bigger flower, bigger fruit, but maybe the taste is not quite the same, or you don't get those stripy colors and things like that. So you can keep that in mind. Again, do some homework. Look up some of the names if you're thinking of some things. Pruning, how do you prune a tomato? Do you prune a tomato? So generally, yes, where the tomato, I meant to put a picture in there and I forgot, where the leaves come together. So here's your stem and here's your leaflets that are your growing point, and then there'll be a little sprout that'll come out of the axil, in the axil here. You would want to prune that off, just either gently break it off, cut it off. You don't want to damage the growing point, but that's what you do want to take those off. As you do that, now, 2 things. If you're doing that and you're doing that as you're going, as the plant gets larger, you will be lessening the canopy. When you open up the canopy, you open up the fruit to more sun scald issues, because now usually pruning is done when you're staking your plant, specifically a single stake. You're having a single stem that's going up the stake or that you're tying up to the stake, and you're taking off those pieces. Do you have to prune? Not necessarily. You can prune some, you can prune just at the bottom and let the rest of it get bushy. But pruning, yes, taking off those little offshoots will help put energy back into the plant and making bigger fruits and things like that. But again, the sun scald, if the sun hits the fruit too long, and it does it with peppers, eggplants, they're the big ones, and sometimes cucumbers, the sun will actually burn the fruit. And that's what the sun scald is. So if it has some canopy, some leaf coverage, that will help prevent that sun from actually touching that fruit for too long, provide some shading for the fruit. So the big problem on tomatoes, I mean, there are more than just hornworms, but tomato hornworm seems to be the biggest question that always comes in. What do I do about them? So I'm going to keep going here just real quick here. Main issues, there's main categories for vegetable problems, cultural issues, things that are happening around that you can correct, pests and diseases. And many of the vegetables share the same issues. So here are a few: cultural: sun scald, blossom end rot, herbicide, fruit cracking, drought stress, deficiencies. And let me show you some pictures. Here's your sun scald. The fruit looks like brown and wrinkled, sunken in on one side. It's basically got sunburn. And it affects a lot of the tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, which are all in the same family. And then cucumbers are in a different one, but it can affect beans as well. So management: lightly shade affected plants from afternoon sun, canopies better developed. Don't thin out don't thin the plants too much for the leaves. And that will help, especially with tomatoes. Okay. Peppers, sometimes you just don't have a choice because those peppers get pretty big. Blossom end rot. Blossom end rot is a big problem. It can happen in watermelons, eggplants, squash. It can happen in a lot of things. They're round black water soaked spots at the bottom, so it looks like a rot, like a fungus, but it really is because it's not getting calcium at the time it needs it for that fruit. The big problem, a lot of people notice it more in tomatoes and peppers, but it does happen in others. It doesn't mean that you don't have calcium in your soil. It could, but it also could mean that the plants were too dry, that the calcium needs to be mobile in this in water in order to get up to the plants and get it used into the fruit. So if the plant shuts down, high temperatures will do this. Sometimes it's not something you do. Sometimes it's just Mother Nature. If we have the high temperatures, it shuts down the photosynthesis and the respiration process. So now the calcium, the nutrients can't get transported to the fruit. So sometimes that blossom end rot. Is there something you can do about it? You can check your soil for your calcium, make sure that there is calcium in the soil, or adding, that's with adding that lime, but soil test is still a better way to know how much calcium is there. A lot of our soils here in the South, we have a lot of calcium around here in Ocean County. A lot of soil tests that come in have very high calcium ratings. So you do want to keep that in mind. But providing sufficient and consistent irrigation is really the key. Keeping the plants well hydrated so those processes don't shut down will keep that calcium mobile and moving into the plant and into the fruit, so it'll prevent that. So it really is not a fungus. It is a deficiency, calcium deficiency. Herbicide. A lot of people, number one thing that people send in, and it not always, but I've seen it on squash and zucchinis and tomatoes, this stunted, twisted, kind of almost surrealish looking like growth. Twisted leaves is herbicide damage. Tomatoes, things in the tomato family are very sensitive to herbicides. And that could be herbicide drift. You're spraying weeds in the lawn, not so much spraying in the lawns in the middle of the summer, but a lot of people are doing, spot sprays or, things like that you got to watch, especially if you have your vegetables around a patio and you're keeping weeds off your patio. Be careful of that runoff. Tomatoes are definitely, you could have an edge of a tomato on this, you could have a whole garden and it's the one end and you'll realize that it was the end that you might have sprayed or somebody sprayed some herbicide nearby that has this problem happening. In potatoes, herbicide damage will cause this yellow chlorotic veining, but also stunted growth. And spotted, this is from drift on the cucumber, the leaves, and this like speckling. Not all speckling will do this, but when the leaves look green and the fruit looks good, but you're getting this, it's possible that it was herbicide drift. And then you can see this is on a pepper. So use extreme care when you're applying it around vegetables. Try to hand pick as much as you can. It's really the best way to do that. Keep that down. Fruit cracking. That's really from the extremes of heat and temperature and water. So the too much water at one time and the fruit can split. So that can be an issue. Not really a whole lot you can do about it except to keep as best even soil moisture. With all this rain, if this happens a little bit more as the fruit is starting to ripen, you can't really do anything about what Mother Nature does, but you can control when you're doing it. Drought stress, I've talked a bit about this. The uppermost leaves are always, they can appear brown, wilted. It affects all vegetables. Again, provide sufficient irrigation at the root zone. These are things that you can do, or that it's environmental, that's something it's cultural, the way it's growing, that you need to fix that. This was another question. A couple people said, what does certain deficiencies look like? Oh my gosh. The resource link is in your resource sheet. So this is just a visual. I'm not going to go through all this because there's a lot of things on here. But nutrients that are mobile, that move easily through the plant, which is nitrogen, potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, manganese. I forget what Cl is right off top of my head. And molybdenum, those things move quickly through the soil. Chloride. So those lower leaves, it's gonna, those nutrients are gonna go to the newer leaves because they're the ones that need it the most. The older leaves are gonna start suffering. So there are some things, if you're starting to see some of this damage happening at the bottom of the plant, and you can follow the flow chart and play around with that. And then there's deficiencies for things that are not very mobile. In other words, things that don't move very well in the plant itself. Boron, sulfur, manganese, no, this is magnesium, zinc, copper, iron, and calcium. So the upper zones are going to show those issues. So if your problem is deficiency and you're seeing it more in the bottom leaves, it's going to be some different nutrients versus the top. So sometimes that'll help you troubleshoot a little bit. But I do have some pictures, and I think I don't have a whole, let's see, I do have, oops, go back. Sorry. Phosphorus deficiency, usually this plays in a little bit more in the early spring with tomatoes, peppers, things in the Solanaceae, the tomato family, nightshade family, is going to be these purple margins on the edges of the leaves. The leaves are somewhat stunted too, but this purplish hue, that's phosphorus deficiency. So you can test the soil for phosphorus and pH levels, but it tends to happen in cooler temperatures because the plant is not able to move the nutrients as easily at that time. Tomatoes, that happens especially when you put them in too soon. Nitrogen deficiency, stunted growth, chlorosis, which means a yellowing of the foliage, yellowing, specifically yellowing of the leaves. Oops, sorry, going too fast. You want to side dress with compost or use that general 5-10-5, some kind of fertilizer. That's a basic general fertilizer to help get that nitrogen back up there and make that greener. These are not always, and again, you guys can bring samples to us and we see these things, and I can't always tell you definitely this is what it is, but we'll try to troubleshoot for you and try and say, okay, well, it's definitely not this, or, you know, we can try and help you figure out what's going on and what might be the issue. But if when in doubt, get a soil test done. If you're really having a major problem with a lot of different fruits, vegetables, and you're having the same kind of yellowing all the way through, it could be in the whole garden there's a deficiency, and it could be an issue. So potassium is more of a chlorosis on the edges, on the margins, the leaf margins here. So that's why you're going to see that. Some of this is like crispy too. That could also be some drought stress, but see how this margin and this last leaf here, this is actually on a bean, I believe. You're seeing that yellowing is kind of going in specific lines. You can actually see some yellowing in here too. And the green veins are sticking out, but the rest of it's turning yellow. That's an issue. So soil test, adjust your pH because maybe the potassium is not being able to get in there, and keep your irrigation up. Okay. I know I'm running real close on time. I still have insects and fungus to go through, but do we have any other particular questions that might be need to address?
You know, I think we're getting to most of them. So
Okay.
I think you're okay to continue.
Okay, and then we can keep on. We can stay on after this too, if anybody wants to stay on. Sorry, and I'm really trying not to talk fast. If you all have seen me talk, you know that's that's a bit of a hard for me. But I still want to make it so that you guys can understand. So, insect issues. You need to monitor for insects. Insects are, if you can, they're kind of like, I don't want to say they're the easiest things, but you can handpick. These are things that you can do without having to do any kind of herbicide treatments or any kind of sprays for, is if you can stop them before they start, or get to when they're starting to get to a point that you notice them, get them, you know, get them while they're young, while the problem's just starting, versus when they're like so bad that the leaves are already like 3/4 of the way gone or something. So you're going to monitor the issues and so scout for these insects. Cabbage worm, these are some of the insects that I'm going to talk about. This is a picture here on the right-hand side of floating row covers. So for most of these insects, I shouldn't say most of these insects, but for a lot of your smaller or trailing vegetables, squash vine borer is the one exception because you don't want to trap the insects in, but you can use the row covers to keep the cabbage looper moths from coming and laying eggs. You can put that over top. The plant can still grow, get sunlight, still get water, but it protects it from getting the insects from getting in there and getting to the foliage. So that is something that's actually a lot of people have some questions about row covers that come up. So let's go here. I'm not going to talk too much about the cabbage worms, but there's you can see these little green guys. So your cabbage and anything in the Brassiaceae family or cole crops, crucifers. There's lots of different names for families, but they chew. The caterpillars chew holes. So this is what the moth will look like. It's white with a black spot when the black tip on the edge here. So row covers. Early planting early before the moths are out. They tend to be one of the first moths that do come out. Hand pick any of the caterpillars that you see. The managements that you'll see in some of these, it's actually going to start with the least toxic and go up to, okay, if you can't stand it anymore, what kind of other options do you have? So you can see BT, which is at Bacillus thuringiensis. I believe it's Israeliensis because there's 3 different types now. But that BT, that's a bacteria that attacks only caterpillars. So that would be good for caterpillars. Pyrethrins, spinosad, neem, they're all organic means. And then if you need to go a little bit, the acetaminoprid and the pyrethroids would be another that's more chemical version. These would be products that have these active ingredients in them. So it's not a brand name that I'm talking about here. I don't know if you need to know whether cross-striped cabbage burns. It's still a caterpillar. It's still chewing. Look for the caterpillars, pull them off if you can. It's hard to keep the moths from getting on there, but again, the row cover, hand pick the caterpillars the best as possible, and then you do have again the BT, the neem, the permethrin, spinosad is another again a great organic one actually, and then you have these other guys that will take care of it. Cabbage looper. Same whole setup on that one. So again, there are 3 different types of caterpillars that tend to get into cabbages. So if you're having cabbage issues, and everybody does, it doesn't matter what you do, you're still going to have some cabbage issues. If you can pick off the worms, the caterpillars before they become a big problem, that's the best way to tolerate those. Corn earworms, not a lot of people ask about corn, but I bring it up because the earworms do get in other fruits, especially tomatoes, and they look very variable. A lot of different varieties, or not varieties, but they do have different color schemes. It burrows into the corn kernels and into fruit. So the management, it's difficult. You need to monitor if you really are having a major problem. This is going to be more for crops, but pheromone traps, which is basically a scent that attracts the moths, the adults, to the pheromone traps, and you're trapping them to see how many, if this is starting to become a problem. If you're getting a lot of moths in that trap, then you need to start using an insecticide from that point. And but again, it's not usually a huge pest for us here in Ocean County, but I know there are other people on the call here. Okay, the end all to be all, the squash vine borer. I think this is our most asked about pest. It affects zucchinis, squashes, sometimes pumpkins, depending on certain varieties. What happens is the vine wilts, the damage to the vine. There's frass, caterpillar poo at the point of entry. So you're going to look, big thing is you're looking for this frass, this like sawdusty kind of, again, this poo at a hole area. Look for a hole in the stem, look down towards the base by the soil area. You can cut open, do a little surgery. You can cut open the stem a little bit and skewer those guys, get them out of there. It's disgusting, but you can do it. Put the stem back together. You can use some people do tinfoil, but you can just use some oh my gosh, that stretchy tape that you can use for your vegetables just to keep that stem back together. If you plant it early, you try to push the limits is when you can put them in the ground, the plants, you'll have harvest before the squash the squash vine borer becomes an issue. So that's one way to get it. So you're kind of combating it by planting early, harvesting what you can. The plant goes, you pull it out, and then you can plant again after in July. Monitor for the adults. So the adults would look like this. I'm sitting here pointing at the screen. That doesn't help you guys any. This squash, this is the adult. It's actually an orangey kind of insect with black wings and a black headpiece, black antenna. That's what you're going to be looking for. That's going to be flying around. That's the adult that makes the egg that lays that caterpillar. I mean, that turns into that caterpillar that bores into your fruit. Row covers. So you need to make sure that you do not have any adults. Let's put it this way. You start seeing a couple, one or two adult of these squash vine borers, and then use the row cover. The idea is that these the adults will come up out of the soil once they pupate and they come up out of the soil, and then they fly around to then lay their eggs. So if you start seeing them, then you put the row cover in. This way you're not trapping the squash vine borer in the plant. So I don't always, row covers are a little bit more work for this particular insect. Cut the borer out, remove the dying vines, anything that's really just gone past the, harvest what you can. You can eat baby zucchinis. They're the new, small zucchini, small fruit thing that everybody is doing these days. You can eat the small stuff. Some stuff, may not be tasteful enough for you if you're making a big dinner or something, but plant a second crop in early July. So the idea is that you're hopefully getting through the stage, the caterpillar stage. They've gone to pupate. The adults won't come out hopefully again till the possibly following year. So you're kind of hoping to miss that window of when they're out there. The other one, this was a big, a lot of people have tried this and they said they really liked it. Zucchini is a summer squash. It's in the summer squash family. So the vines tend to be a little bit softer. It's easy for these borers to go in. Winter squash, which pumpkins are in, tend to have a harder, much sturdier stalk. So what they found is in Italy, or not just in Italy, but there's an Italian zucchini. They call it Italian zucchini, but it's really a winter squash. But it's called tromboncino. And if you get that variety, you can try it. You harvest it when it's younger, like this, like your traditional gourds. Otherwise, you get a big gourd like this, and that's when it's really ripe. And then it's more like, it's going to taste more like a winter squash. But if you get it when it's young, so they say harvest it when the flowers fall off the fruit. When it's young, it tastes more like zucchini, like the traditional zucchini. So that's something that you could do. You could try that variety. So it's not a zucchini that's resistant to the vine borer. It's actually a different type of squash, but that you're harvesting it and eating it like zucchini. Okay, I hope that answered quite a few of those questions. That's always a biggie. Tobacco, tomato, hornworm. These worms have these little funky little horns. They're kind of cool looking insects. They do a lot of damage overnight or in one day. They can do a lot of damage. So pick them off. If you can find them, pick them off. When you see one like up here in this upper or middle red middle section here with the white eggs on the back, they're actually pupa of a brachnid wasp that has parasitized this critter. So leave him there. He's already dead. He's a walking dead. So leave him on there so that hopefully when these new wasps come out, they can infect more. And they are your natural defense system for the hornworms. Still doesn't mean that the hornworm's not going to do some damage to your plant, but if you can get to the hornworms before they totally defoliate your plant, you can still have a decent crop. You might get some more sun scald because now the leaves are kind of gone through. You can, this is what the pupa would look like in the soil. It's actually pretty big. This moth is actually, I think 3 or 4 inches in width from tip to tip. It's a pretty big moth. And it does tend to fly. I think it's a little bit more out at night than it is during the day. But in any case, you can hand pick the worms. Again, that BT, the neem, the pymethrin, spinosad would work. They actually added carbaryl, which common name 7 is one of the chemical means, and then you can go up more as you go up in the chemical usage, if you feel that you need that, because you just can't get them all and they're just getting overwhelming. Tomato pinworm, we don't get it all often, but you'll see these little tiny holes right up here by the stem of the tomato, and it's a little tiny little caterpillar that's in here, and it affects peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, and eggplants. It's in things, and again in that Solanaceae crop. And it causes the leaf. So the leaves, when you see that, what happens is they chew the leaves. So you'll see that silvery kind of like a window pane look. And then when you look closer, they've actually burrowed into the fruit as well, or they can. And then it ruins the fruit. You can try opening it up, and as long as they haven't done too much damage, you can eat the bottom half of the fruit. But hand pick, carbaryl, and proper sanitation at the end of the season. So getting rid of your if you've had this problem, getting rid of those tomato plants so that you're hopefully taking any eggs and anybody that's overwintering out of the garden. Okay, brown marmorated stink bug. We heard a lot about that in I guess in the late 80s and the 90s. It still is a problem out there, and they make the fruit deformed. They do blossoms. If your blossom gets deformed, then your fruit can't mature correctly, so that's a problem. It damages the stems and the leaves and affects various vegetables. There's a whole way to find out what is a marmorated stink bug. It has these lines on the edge, and the antennas and the legs are striped. These are what the babies look like. Aren't they cute? They look like little, I don't know, little ladybuggy type things. And this is a nymph, so they do look different in their different stages. But if you can get them, if you can hand pick them, don't crush them. If you can hand pick them, because they do stink, that's why they're called stink bugs. They will smell, make your hand smell. But if you can hand pick eggs before they get to the stage of hatching, and adults, row covers will help. And then also some of the horticultural oil. For some reason, I have that after carbaryl and pyrethroids. The horticultural oil would be more organic. But this is what the stink bugs can do in fruit. So it's a big problem more for people, commercial fruit growers, than it is for maybe homeowners, because you could just eat around that or cut that out. But not all stink bugs are pests. So here are this bug here, and there's one here. Shield bugs actually are good for the garden. So kind of get up and close and personal with your stink bug without squishing it, so it doesn't stink you. But keep the good bugs and get rid of the bad ones. And if you're not sure, send us some pictures. We'll try to help you out. Colorado potato beetle, a big problem in a lot of, again, the Solanaceae crops that defoliates the plant. Get rid of the eggs. You see these little yellow, orangey things on the back of your leaves. They're usually on the underneath of the leaves. Get rid of that leaf. Just, you don't have to take the whole leaf, just take that leaflet off. Squish it, do whatever you got to do. These are the nymphs getting ready to pupate into an adult. This is the adult. Get rid of them. They will eat everything. So it's a big problem. We tend to have a lot of problems with those. Again, rotating your crops, because they do, if I'm not mistaken, they do stay in the soil. They overwinter that way. So rotating your crops so they're not in the same spot. Using resistant varieties, row covers, hand picking. And then there's different BT, that BT thuringiensis, tenbronensis, that is the Bacillus thuringiensis that is for beetles, that will kill beetle, not caterpillars, but beetles. So that's one thing. And this Beauveria bassiana, that's actually a native soil fungus that, or it's a fungus that's in the soil that actually can affect the the larval, I believe the nymph stage of these guys. Pyrmethrins, spinosad, acetaminoprid, well, that word. Sorry, guys. I'm starting to get tired, and I'm sure you are too. Pyrethroids are also doable, but if you can monitor, and again, grab them, it's disgusting. I get it. Wear gloves, but get rid of these critters before they really start doing some damage to your plants. Cucumber beetles, same thing. But they are really tiny. Sometimes you'll get striped, sometimes you get spotted. Depends on the two different types. But they are, the problem is with these guys, the cucumber beetles is a big problem, is that they can transmit bacterial wilt disease. Once you have this, there's nothing you can do. So you need to rip the plant out. So if you can get to these insects before they create this wilt, they transfer virus, sort of like ticks transfer diseases to us, same thing that these things do to anything in the cucurbit, which is the cucumber family. So you want to try to take care of that. Again, row covers, hand picking if you find them. This Bovaria, that's, I don't really say it right, Bassiana, and the pyrethrum. So these are things that you can use again. So there's a lot of things in your arsenal that you could use that are organic, but also then if you need to go stronger because you just can't get a hold of them, there are some things in your arsenal that you can use, and you do want to try to rotate using things. So if you're using something for a month and you're spraying every other week, or you're using it 3 times, you know, you may want to change to something else because you don't want these guys to become resistant to that product. Okay. Harlequin beetles, another toughie, causes stippling and leaf browning. I can't say that they really will kill the plant, but they can do some damage. But again, hand picking, wear gloves. They do stain your actual hands. So wear gloves. Don't ask, I don't know why. I guess it can also be an irritant to your skin. Insecticidal soap and neem oil actually are the better choices for management on these guys. They're pretty insects, but yeah, not when they're on your plant and eating them up. Flea beetles, they're really tiny. Look at these holes. This is an eggplant. They do other varieties other than eggplant, but that seems to be a big one, and really bad on young plants because they make too many holes. The plant can't photosynthesize as well. You're not going to have a good fruit crop. Row covers, again, you can see the list of things that you can use. Hot pepper wax is another one. I guess they don't care for the pepper, the casipin that's in pepper, that it bothers them, so it keeps them away. So that's something you can try as well. All right, any particular insect questions? And I think I have about 5 slides, I believe, on fungus. And then I know I'm still running a little over time. You want me to just keep going and then finish and then?
Yeah, just keep
Okay.
going.
Okay, I didn't know if I lost everybody. Okay, disease issues. Usually fungicides need to be applied before the disease starts. Any cultural controls that you can do, get rid of at the end of the season, cleaning up, sanitation, get rid of those. Good air circulation. Don't plant your plants too close together. Watering early in the morning. Don't water the foliage. These are all things that will help you lessen the disease chances. Monitoring for disease as they start. You can remove the disease foliage or fruit to help it from keeping it from spreading so that you're still able to get some fruit from the plants. So powdery mildew, biggest one. Powdery mildew is white powdery fungus, leaves and stems. It primarily affects cucurbits. It'll do squash. I've seen a little on tomatoes, but it's usually more on the bigger leafy squash, zucchinis, and cucumbers. Usually powdery mildew does not really have, it has some moisture content, but it's not because of the humidity in the air. It's just water sitting on the fungus is ripe. The conditions are ripe for it to go. A little bit of fungus, the plants are still going to grow. So if it's like this isn't horrible. If it's like this, you've got a problem because then now the plant can't photosynthesize and get the energy to the fruit. So pick what you can. If it's, I don't want to say it grows out of it, it probably won't, but you can try to help the powdery mildew by doing a sulfur. That's only for pumpkins. Potassium bicarbonate or chlorothanol. That is a chemical means. But again, once you're at this point, and if you only have a little bit of green, don't spray. It's just get rid of the plants so that you're lessening the spread of the disease. Okay, downy mildew. Downy mildew is a tough one. It's hard to diagnose sometimes, but yellow to brown spots on top of the leaves, and then gray fuzzy fungus under the leaves. So you can sort of see it here. It's in between the veins. It affects many crops, but especially cucurbits. Downy mildew also does basil. And if you have it on your basil in patients, if you have it on your basil, there's really not much you're going to do because you need to eat the leaves. So you need to get rid of that crop before it gets any worse. So you need to pull that plant out and check the others. Keep an eye out for, I think Thai basil is one of those that it does not seem to bother. Oops. Go back, sorry. Management, plant early, plant in sunny areas, avoid overhead irrigation, and apply the chlorothanol if it's an issue for you. If you've had it in the past, it most likely will be another issue the following year. So you may need to go chemical depending on your situation. Bacterial wilt. This is what we're talking about. Cucumber beetles, if you can get rid of those. The cucumber beetles, if you would see this wilt and if you pull the stem apart and make a cut and you put the stem back together and then pull it apart and you see that kind of stringy, goopy stuff in the center, that's bacteria. And there's no solutions. You need to destroy the vine and get rid of those cucumber beetles. So that can be a problem. So you need to watch that. Fusarium and verticillium wilts. Most of this is tends to be solanaceous crops, tomatoes, resistant varieties. If you have this, get rid of it. If you find it that you're seeing this black or this brown going up in your stem, if you pull apart one of these wilted plants and you're seeing that, get rid of it. Do not plant anything in that area. I don't know if a straight 3 to 4 foot area outside of that area for 3 to 4 years, because that wilt stays very viable in the soil. So you really do need to do that crop rotation. Mosaic viruses, once you have a virus, you got to get rid of it. The insects, aphids, cucumber beetles, all different things that are sucking insects can pass this disease on to another plant. So if you've got a crop and you've got one plant with the mosaic virus, get rid of it before insects spread it. Okay. And so you'll see the mottled leaves. These leaves, some of these do look like they're herbicide damage, but we're looking at this specifically, this mottling as well as the stunted leaves that is causing that. It also causes it on the fruit. So here's a good zucchini. Looks like it might be starting, but here's one that this is not what this particular plant is supposed to have look like, the fruit. And that is virus. To get rid of those plants. Do not save the seeds. Get rid of it. Here's another version of it. Mechanical means such as insects, aphids, thrips, leafhoppers, beetles can vector the virus. Here it is on the fruit. So you can see this circle like a bullseye just modeling like what is wrong with this fruit. This is, you need to get rid of the plant. And then plant resistant varieties, destroy virus plants and control those vectors. Okay, and tomato, late blight. Big one that's going to start coming up, some early blights in there, but the lower and older leaves are affected first, water-soaked margins, gray-green spots, primarily the white spores. You can't see it in here. There's white spores underside. If you flip the leaves over, you'll see these white spores. Tomatoes, potatoes, plant-resistant varieties. Good air circulation. Again, don't keep your plants. Pruning will help with this, tomato pruning. Also keeping your plants some space between the plants so there's good air circulation. No overhead watering, proper sanitation. At the end of the season, get rid of, if you see the leaves starting to do this, get rid of them. Don't put them in your compost pile, throw them out. Copper, mancozeb, and chlorothanol are some active ingredient things with active ingredients that you could use to help with this. Early blight, I believe it's a similar control. Early blight, late blight, I don't want to say there isn't a correlation with it really being early. It could happen at either time. Late blight does tend to happen in older plants. Early blight tends to happen on younger plants. Okay, angular leaf spot. I don't know. Oops, I don't know how much of this we see. We see a lot of it in the cucumber with the leaves. I don't notice it as much on the fruit that's come into us. Basically, again, planting those resistant varieties. A lot of this management is the same for a lot of these different problems, whether they're fungal or insect. Well, fungal problems need fungicide. So you, if you're still having a problem year after year, you need to be careful of that. Anthracnose is another one. Pumpkins, you'll see it a lot. And now that I know what I'm looking for, I see it in pumpkins when, at the end of the season, we see this anthracnose starting. Spotted foliage, these water-soaked soft spots, and in fruit rots as they keep going. Crop rotation, air circulation, again, overhead irrigation, avoid that. Proper end of the season sanitation and remove infected fruit right away. And then if you do need to spray or you feel you need to spray, the copper, mancozeb, or chlorothanol. A lot of sprays, whether you're doing it for insects or for fungus, is what's your threshold? What can you tolerate in your garden? Not everybody can tolerate the same thing. So I don't like to say, don't use any chemicals ever. Even organic farmers use some chemicals that are approved, they're approved, but they use them wisely. Again, stressing that you monitor for these issues. get them while they're young before they really take over your crop. This should be my last slide. Proper crop rotation, to avoid major issues, crop rotation. Talked about that. Plant resistant varieties. Adequate sunlight. If plants are too shady, they're not going to grow as well. They're going to be stressed. Therefore, other issues come in. Good air circulation, proper watering, water soil, not foliage. Proper nutrition, soil tests, pH. Make sure that you get a good base at least to start, so you have an idea. How can you fix the soil if you don't know what's wrong with it, or if there's anything to get wrong? Maybe it's fine. Why keep adding stuff to your soil if you don't need to? Control the weeds during the growing season. Controlling those weeds will keep your a lot of the insects that can pass on disease, will keep them at bay, or keep them down, keep the numbers down. If necessary, apply fungicide as a preventative before the issue becomes really bad. Apply pesticides, when applying. Read all label directions and beware of spraying in high temperatures. And usually your labels will have a warning 80 or 80 and above. Be careful about spraying, especially any kind of oils. But be careful about spraying in those temperatures. Don't do it. The other thing is read the pesticides, since you're using them on whether it's an organic pesticide or not. Read the dates of harvest. How often can you spray it? How soon can you spray it before you can harvest it? If it's 7 days before harvest, so the last spray you can make is 7 days, you can't spray it after that. Read the labels. Don't poison, don't add more issues to yourselves as well. And proper sanitation at the end of the season. So, oh my goodness, this was so much information. I understand. I want to thank you guys for your attention. And I know I ran over. I'm sorry. I try. But what kind of questions can we answer for those that are still hanging on? Or did you guys get them all?
No, a lot of people did dip out, which is fine. One question, I was typing it and I was like, she can answer it quicker than I can type it. Can one spray with BT or neem prophylactically?
I do not believe so. I don't know how much residual effect those products have. So you'd have to read the label, and it may tell you can, if you're spraying it once a week versus once every 2 weeks, it has a little residual. It doesn't have a lot. I don't believe there's a lot of residual on those. So it doesn't stay on the plant and be active unless there's an insect that it has to actually work on.
But actually, like it has a little bit of residual, and it affects certain insects by eating the plant that's sprayed with.
Okay, right. So yes, thank you. Depending on the product that's used, yes.
That's prophylactically, really.
Yes. I didn't think of that.
Spinosad, I think. If neem has the fungicide property, I spray prophylactically, but I use just a fungicide, not something that has a insecticide portion to it, which the neem has. So,
right.
As a fungicide, you want to spray prophylactically.
Right, for fungicide. I misunderstood. I assumed they were talking about insects, but yeah, insects.
I think they are, but so okay. I think, but for me, I would kind of like split it up.
Yes. See, which is, again, I think it would, I wouldn't spray it 3 weeks in advance when you don't see anything. If you start seeing an issue with the insects, then I would spray.
Correct.
Yep.
Which
that was a good question.
Heads into like thresholds, what can you, like,
how much can you tolerate?
Yeah. I want to see what I'm spraying for, though. I don't want to just guess.
Right, because you do have your beneficial insects, your lace bugs, which I didn't talk about beneficials. That's a whole nother topic. And you don't want to hurt the good bugs as well. All right, we got any other burning?
Ted just said, should you spray for fungus before it appears? Yes.
Yeah, you really, I mean, as best as you can.
Helps.
Yeah, as best as you can. You can see, if you just start seeing it, do it then. You're not maybe going to, once you get it, if the plant's half of it's got fungus, fungicide's probably not going to help much.
Right.
Someone asked if they can eat onions and scallions that they see growing wild in their lawn.
Ooh. So I'm going to say no. And the reason I'm going to say no is because you don't know what's been sprayed, if any, well, you probably know what you're doing in your lawn. I would not. I don't know what's going on, what the water, I would not. I'm just going to say that. You don't know if anything's been sprayed on the lawn. I mean, you may know yourself, maybe there's drift from the neighbors. I would not. Are they edible? I believe they are, but I would not in a home lawn situation, especially if you have a lawn service or anything like that.
You know, I think we've really got to most of the questions.
Okay.
A lot of thank yous coming in. Great webinar, tons of information.
I know. Sorry for the time. Oh, there was just no way. I even kept the slides down. Oh, but I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for joining us and sharing in our journey, our gardening journey here through these internet the internet stuff. But I'm hoping that we can help you guys. I'm going to try to stop sharing. I'm hoping that we can help you guys really, make your gardens grow and just troubleshoot. Send us emails. Patty and I, you'll get an email from us, actually from Teresa, with the links. If you have more questions, please send them our way. Send us photos. It's really the best way for us to get an idea of what's going on in the area, if that's the only plant and things like that. So I really want to thank everybody.
And actually,
for
we're open and taking samples right now. We're not open. You can't come in, but you can drop off your samples. So that has been opened up, so you can do that as well.
Yes, and we have a form at the counter in our little vestibule, so you can do it after hours if you need to. So, but again, thank you. I hate to keep everybody on. It's 9 o'clock. Oh my gosh.
Jean, thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Jean. Couldn't have done it without you.
Thank you. It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say you probably had a
you.
lot of questions, but there's I'll get off so that the survey pops up, and then we will answer whatever questions we can tomorrow if we need to. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Patty,
night,
as
everybody.
usual,
Thank
and
you.
Jean. Oh, you're a lifesaver. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Stop.